are really where things are happening. We are the cultural, social, public policy laboratories across the country, as well as driving this nation's economic recovery. It's incumbent upon us to work together and collaboratively, and Mayor Adams and I are very much committed to doing that. We have worked historically with the City of New York, particularly our respective police departments, and Mayor Adams talked about ways in which we can really lead a national conversation around some of the common issues that are plaguing all cities, and particularly the large and mid-sized cities around public safety. So that conversation will continue. We won't get into just specifics about what we talked about, because some of it is obviously law enforcement sensitive, but the level of cooperation that we are going to be bringing to this discussion is something exciting for me, and I look forward to a continued partnership. I'd like to invite the mayor to say a few words, and then we'll be happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mayor. And it's just a real pleasure here to be in Chicago and sitting down and watching the innovative approach to public safety. We both agree that public safety is a prerequisite to prosperity, but it's public safety and justice. And what I enjoyed the most about the conversation that the two of us shared is how we both focus on not only the immediate action we must do to keep our streets safe, but it's intervention and prevention. You find that our country, for the most part, is divided into groups. The groups, one, want to focus on just the prevention aspects, dealing with dyslexia, learning disabilities, foster care systems, how do we correct those problems? But the other part, they want to ignore the prevention and only focus on the intervention. How do we deal with violence right now? To have a mayor here in Chicago that clearly understands it's the combination of the prevention and intervention. We have to turn off the faucet that is continually feeding the river of violence in our cities. And it is, there's a tint of racism to this. We don't manufacture guns in Chicago. But why are we able to remove 12,000 guns off the street? Where are they coming from? Ghost guns, where are they coming from? And I say over and over again, America's failure to define crises, anything that happens outside of the black and brown communities is defined as a crisis. This is a crisis that we have been facing historically, and it has been limited to certain geographical areas of our cities and our country. And the mayor and I are clear, we are not going to remain silent. We're not going to pretend as though there is some conscious failures that are taking place. And her way of getting the communities involved, by the time the police interacts with a young person with a gun, the system already failed. We called the police to do everything. We are now bringing in the idea of having communities' involvement and stopping and damming the rivers that feed the sea of violence in our cities. And we're going to do it as a partnership. The way goes cities in America is going to determine how this country goes. That's right. You can't continue to ignore the crises in our cities. And as Chicago, New York, Atlanta, Detroit, St. Louis, Maryland, all of these cities are dealing with the same crises, but there's something else. The victims are black and brown. The victims are watching themselves being denied the basic services they deserve. We need help from Washington, D.C. We need to staff the ATF appropriately. We need to do information sharing. We need to focus on those illegal gun manufacturers that are producing these guns that are proliferating our cities. And we need to bring resources on the ground to make sure we don't continue to abandon our children. We're committed to doing so. And that is why I'm in Chicago today. When I had the meeting with the mayor in Washington, D.C., I just said simply, she gets it. She gets it. And I'm going to visit all my mayors across this country that get it. And I'm happy to be here with you today, Mayor. Thank you.
Absolutely. So we're happy to take your questions.
Mayor Lightfoot, Mayor Adams, thank you very much. We'll kick it off with Craig Wall from ABC7. Go ahead, Craig.
Mayor, first of all, can you tell us, was there something that you learned from New York that you can apply here to Chicago? As we're heading into the summer, violence typically upticks. Anything that you learned in your conversations that you think Chicago can put into place that can make Chicago safer?
Well, as I said, we are talking and have been talking to New York for quite a long time, and certainly predates my time as mayor and Mayor Adams' time as mayor. But I think what we agree upon is the necessity of making sure that we're doing a couple of things at the same time. And the mayor really alluded to it. We've got to make sure that we hold violent, dangerous people accountable. On that, we both agree. But we also, as the mayor said, and I think very eloquently, stopping this river of violence. And for me, I would say stopping the pull of the souls of our young people to the streets. If a young person grows up in a neighborhood and doesn't see and touch and can feel opportunity at their fingertips and believes that their only purpose in life, the only destiny that they have is to mine somebody's corner drug spot, that's a fail for all of us. And I think we're aligned on that. We've got to do more to make sure that we intervene in a proactive way to provide support and love to these young people at the earliest possible stage in life. And Mayor Adams is, I think, 1,000% right. We all spend and focus on a lot of things in intervening once somebody has gone down the wrong path. But what we need to do is make sure we are being proactive on the front end of life, providing them with tools and love and support, education obviously being the most critical factor, but having them pursue their passions so that they don't, when they come to that proverbial fork in the road, they know which path they should take because they have had the support of a loving, caring adult in their life and a community that helps them make the right choices at the right time.
If we can ask a question of Mayor Adams. Mayor, when we look at the numbers, just year-to-date so far, your CompStat and our CompStat stats show Chicago with 104 murders, New York with 76, 4 times the rate Chicago does of New York. Shootings, 396 versus 217, 5 times the number of shootings per population here. What does New York learn from Chicago?
A lot. I think one of the mistakes we make is that there's some great solutions in smaller cities than the size of New York. We need to go and leave no stone unturned on how do you scale up. You could give the focus and attention to a city like Chicago and learn from what they're doing. I learned just in one conversation today that we're going to expand on how the mayor's going on the ground, doing the local town halls to speak with grassroots communities and organizers. It's so important to do so. And this is not, we want to be clear, we're pro-public safety and justice. This is not touchy-feely and saying, let's ignore the crime that we're facing. No, we're saying the way you deal with crime is to prevent crime while you're dealing with what's taking place right now. And it's an entirely new way of thinking about public safety. And so the goal is that there are many examples we have here in New York. I like what the mayor's doing in the recruitment. We're hearing all over the country that there's a recruitment problem of police officers. There were historical barriers that were preventing people from using life experiences to have waivers. We're going to look at to duplicate that in New York City. And so in the brief conversation I had, I know this is an entryway to learn from each other. We want to look at best practices of how do we finally turn the generational problem of crime in our cities.
Giacopolis, political.
Maybe you could both talk about this. Mayor Adams, you were critical of the Lightfoot administration about her dealing with the school mass crisis, and you were critical a few months ago about handling of crime. Did you guys talk that through? Did you not understand maybe the situation of Chicago when you first said that, and what happened to your finger?
I'm asked that often. I'm not clear on critical. I stated I did not close my schools. The mayor knows her system I'm not here to dictate how another mayor runs
But you were
it.
critical. You were publicly critical of.
Okay, I don't know your definition of critical, so maybe you could tell me how
Well, you
it's critical.
called out saying that we're not Chicago. We're above that.
That's not critical. I said that New York is not Chicago. The mayor knows her city. I know my city. And so we're not Chicago. We don't do, with how she evaluated what was happening in her school system was different. So when people raised at that press conference, well, Chicago closed their school system, I said, we're not Chicago. We're New York. That's not being critical. That is allowing the mayor to analyze her platform, which was different from my platform and my circumstance of having 1 million plus children in school. So I don't consider that to be critical. I consider that to be a clear observation that New York City is not Chicago when it comes down to a school system.
So you had a healthy discussion. You didn't talk about that in your meeting behind closed doors.
Well, you know, what I like about the mayor is that we don't get caught up in the noise and the distraction. We're focused on the solution, because I know in this business, we are professional at pitting each other against each other. We align, and we use the term stay focused, no distractions, and grind. We got work to do. If we spend our time debating on if she closed her school or didn't close her school while babies are being shot in school, then we are abandoning our responsibility. We don't need to spend time on philosophical conversations. We got real work to do. And that's the type of mayors we're going to be, and I know that's the type of mayor I'm going to be.
You're both kind of mayors who are upfront and not afraid to say what you want to say.
Yeah, well,
Did
you know,
you-
I think that when you look at the totality of our lives, our professional lives, you know, as a young man arrested, beat by police officers, going into the police department, becoming a captain, being a state senator, having a learning disability that was not diagnosed until I was in college, I know how the system has abandoned me. And I'm sure the mayor can give her narrative and her life story, and it's the same. It's time for us to have leaders that have gone through a lot, so we can help people that are going through a lot. We're the right mayors for the time that we're in right now.
And your finger?
It's the weirdest thing. You know, I shook someone's hand, I felt an electric shock, and it damaged my tendon. I have to wear this for 8 weeks. So for the next 8 weeks, people are going to say, hey, what happened to your finger?
Were they in Chicago? Chicago person? Dude?
Thank you. All right, Heather Sharon, WCTV.
I was going to say he got bitten by the press, but
Hi, Mayor.
are you?
Did you and Mayor Adams discuss police reform efforts? Are there things that New York is doing that can help rebuild community trust in the department and vice versa for Mayor Adams?
well, look, I think we both recognize that you build trust by being present and engaging and listening to community. And that's kind of, I don't need to tell Mayor Adams, particularly not with his experience as a police officer, about how you build trust. You build it by being present, person by person, block by block. And that's the things that are happening in New York, and that's the things that are happening here in Chicago. But did we get into specific issues around reform? We didn't. We talked mostly about the things that we are doing, both in the immediate, intermediate, and the long term, to really deal with these generational crises of public safety in far too many neighborhoods across our respective city.
Mayor Adams, are there things that New York has done to reform the NYPD that you think Chicago should take a page from?
Well, I think that we are going to use best practices. That's a term that I enjoy and the mayor has shared, that she enjoyed. We all have to figure out how do we rebuild the trust. We cannot deny there has been a problem in trust. The historical failures, everything from the Rodney King case all the way down to the Eric Gardner case, those are the professional things that we all viewed. But we also have the Eric Adams case. To be arrested and beat by police officers is something that's embedded in just about every black boy in our country. That lack of trust is real. So our goal is to recruit. Our goal is to retain those officers that understand it's an honor to put on that badge and that uniform. Our goal is to lift up the department and give them the tools to do their jobs, but to expeditiously remove those who are not suitable to understand the nobility of public protection. For far too long, our agencies have been a safe haven for abusive officers. Those days end. You will not be abusive in the city of New York. and be a member of what I consider to be the finest occupation you could have.
You mentioned that there was federal help that you needed staffing the ATF. You mentioned, is there specific help other than task forces that we've seen, used in New York and Chicago during the summer months, specifically to stop crime in the upcoming summer?
Yes, and I'm a big believer of this. People always say, here's another task force. There's nothing wrong with people coming together in the room, doing an analysis of where we are and where we need to go. So from the federal government, number one, we need to have proper funding and staffing of ATF. We need information sharing. We need to stop allowing ourselves to be bullied by the NRA and allowing the laws to restrict us from sharing information. Number two, we need real dollars on the ground to deal with preventive steps of allowing children not to go in the pathway of crime. We need to zero in on foster care children, more likely to be victims of a crime or participate in crime. We need to have dyslexia screening. 30% of the prison population in our country is dyslexic. We need to zero in on the problem of domestic violence and domestic abuse. We need to go after those gun dealers, which is only a small number, that's feeding the crisis of crimes. Clarity on federal laws around gun trafficking. We should be very clear on what it is. 10 guns in New York State is not enough. It's too many. We should go down to 3. We need to zero in on how we're going to deal with ghost gun. This is a real crisis that our country is facing. You have a person that could have a device, sit in his living room, and manufacture guns. And then we need to tell the Supreme Court, it's a bad decision with the open carry law. Can't get in the way of our desire to keep the public safe. And so there's a laundry list that I have for Washington, D.C. I shared it with President Biden, and I shared it with my congressional delegation. We need help. Cities like Chicago and New York, we need help. How do you take 12,000 guns off the street? And there's 10,000 more waiting, 10 times that amount waiting to come back. It's not acceptable.
And for the mayor, have you made your pick for the 11th Ward seat, and will you nominate somebody in time for the Rules Committee to consider that nomination in time for a final vote on Wednesday?
My goal is to make sure that we get a final decision made so that we can meet that deadline. I think the residents of the 11th Ward deserve to know who their alderman is so that they can go back to business. There's work to be done. Streets that need paving, we need to make sure that they can get constituent services. It's not fair to have a very small staff now shoulder that responsibility. So yes, we will. The goal is to get somebody named and picked in time for them to be voted on in next week's City Council meeting.
Jermont Terry, CBS.
Welcome to Chicago, Mayor Adams. Let's talk about, you guys have mentioned intervention and prevention. But as a former transit police officer yourself, here in Chicago, we have seen a dramatic uptick in crime on our Ls, which is considered our subway system. Was there any discussion as to what you know personally from being a transit cop, and have you enlightened the mayor potentially on something about what you can take from that? Because many people along the CTA rails are just concerned. While we can respect intervention and prevention, right now they feel as if they can't ride the subway.
And intervention is right now. I can't go to my passengers and my commuters and my tourists and tell them that we're going to deal with the crisis you're feeling when I address the problems in my school system. That's prevention. Intervention is about how do I make you safe right now. And that is part of the long-term conversation we want to have with her team as we share ideas in doing so. We're dealing with a real problem in our subway system. Many people are dealing with mental health crises that is creating the feeling of uncertainty. We're dealing with an increase in robberies. The fallout of COVID has created a real hostile environment, the lack of employment. And I'm sending a clear message that it's no longer acceptable to have passengers and those who are trying to open our city again to feel as though they can't use our mass transit. That's the lifeblood of our system. And so we have we're going to see a zero encampment. You can't have encampments on your subway system. We're going to have a zero encampment. My team is doing that. I'm telling all of my chiefs that generals don't lead from the rear. They lead from the front. All of my chiefs are now getting in the subway system. They're doing a tour of duty in the subway system to have a visible presence. We're going to have a zero tolerance for the things that have created that environment. And we're going to learn from Chicago what they're doing on their L line so that we can see best practices. And we're going to travel throughout the country and see what others are doing. Washington, D.C. is seeing an uptick. All over the country we're seeing that, and we're going to put our heads together and operate as a team of how do we make our transit line safe as well as our streets safe. And that is the energy we're bringing. We have to work together. Cities will determine the success of America. We know that, and it's time for the federal government to know that.
And let me just say, I don't know that we've met before, and I don't know that you regularly cover City Hall, but 10 days ago we announced a series of increased security measures for the Chicago Transit Association. Let me just briefly recap them for you. Number one, there's going to be additional police resources. That already started. So we believe that visibility of police on our bus, on our rail, on our platforms is critically important. And so we're significantly enhancing the amount of police resources that we were putting on the CTA. In addition to that, the CTA board recently approved a doubling of the amount of resources for non-law enforcement security officers that are also going to be part of the transit system. So we are very, very focused on making sure that we send a very clear message that any kinds of violence, crimes on the CTA is simply not going to be tolerated. And we want to make sure that we're working with the state's attorney's office that when we do see someone and arrest them that is committed a crime on the CTA, that they are prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. Our subway system was the only subway system in the country that operated at full levels during the pandemic. It was critically important, as the mayor said. Just as the New York subway system is critical and the bus and rail system is critical to New York, so is it critical here. It is the lifeblood of our city, and many of our residents depend upon the CTA, whether bus, rail, or a combination, to get from their homes, to get to their jobs. And we need to make sure that they have confidence that when they swipe in to get on the train, to get on the bus, that they're going to be safe. And that's why that heightened police presence and protecting, frankly, the CTA workers is also important.
And we understand there's a difference between additional police officers and additional security.
Yes.
And there's a distinction between what NYC does and what Chicago does.
We have very different, and not just in terms of scale, but very different challenges on a respective transportation system. But where we are aligned is the transportation system must be safe, and we will not tolerate anything less than that.
Mayor Lightfoot, Mayor Adams, thank you very much for your time.
you.
That's a wrap.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.